Now, let's move on to the term ecology. This is a term that was originally defined in 1866 by Ernest Haeckel. Ecology means the study of the relationships that develop among living organisms and between these organisms and their environment. Ecological investigations may take place at different levels, at different scales, involving, for example, the study of the relationships of individual species, or plants or animals, or the study of a community patterns. The popular usage of the term tends to be loose and is commonly applied to environmental problems that have a human origin. Ecosystem. Odom explains that living organisms and their non-living abiotic environment are inseparably interrelated and they interact upon each other. Any entity or natural unit that it's considered an ecosystem includes living and non-living parts, interacting to produce a stable system in which the exchange of materials between the living and the non-living parts follow paths. This is an ecological system or an ecosystem. So, an ecosystem encompasses a dynamic complex of plant, animal, and microorganism communities and the non-living environment interacting as a functional unit. Humans are an integral part of ecosystems. Ecosystems vary enormously in size, and a temporary pond in a tree or an ocean or a river basin, all of them are considered ecosystems. In environmental policy, we are interested in protecting the ecosystems themselves by their importance and intrinsic value, but also because of the ecosystem's services. The services ecosystems provide to the environment. What do we mean by ecosystem services? We mean ecosystem services as the benefits people obtain from ecosystems. These services are organized into 4 categories. They include provisioning services, such as provision of food, provision of water, regulating services, such as regulation of floods, drought, land degradation, and diseases. The 3rd category is supporting services, such as soil formation and nutrient cycling. And the 4th category is the cultural services, such as recreational, spiritual, religious, or other non-material benefits. The ecosystem approach is premised on a systemic and interdisciplinary vision, adding value to the ecosystem services related to human well-being. Internalization of the costs of maintaining ecosystem services in production systems, and closer ties between science and public policy. The ecosystem approach is being applied all over the world, fostering platforms, discussion forums, and international negotiations. In Brazil, for instance, there have been several governmental and non-governmental initiatives in different scales in favor of the provision of ecosystem services related to water, carbon, and biodiversity. And it was set up a public policy mechanism, the payment for environmental services, that is a financial mechanism that allows voluntary compensations to land users, payment or another form, for the adoption of better forest management and rehabilitation practices that can result in ecosystem services to the benefit of a specific user or to the benefit of the society as a whole. Although the ecosystem services is a term that is often used as a synonymous of environmental services, but the literature clarifies that there is a basic difference between the two concepts. Ecosystem services are meant to be those that come directly from the action of nature, while environmental services would be considered those who are provided by natural systems, but as a consequence of the interference of human activities, the anthropogenic management. Now, a few words on carrying capacity, tipping point, limits and boundaries. The carrying capacity of an environment is meant to be the maximum population size of a biological species that can be sustained by that specific environment, given the food, habitat, water, and other resources available. So, the carrying capacity is the environment's maximal load, which in population ecology corresponds to the population equilibrium, when the number of deaths in a population equals the number of births, as well as immigration and emigration. Carrying capacity is applied to the maximum population an environment can support in ecology, agriculture, and fisheries. And the term has been applied to a few different processes in the past before finally being applied to population limits in the 1950s. A tipping point is a critical point in an Earth system component around which small perturbations can trigger an irreversible transition from one state to another. This means that transitions are not necessarily abrupt nor irreversible, but from a certain point on, it can begin a transition that is impossible to reverse. It is believed that such points exist for many of the Earth system, such as the Arctic summer sea ice, the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets, and the Amazon rainforest. These dynamics can be illustrated by the Arctic summer sea ice, which is currently melting fast due to climate change. As the ice melts, more of the ocean area becomes darker and so absorbs more sunlight, which increases global warming and speeds up the melting. As a result, the Arctic is warming much faster than the rest of the world. Moving to the terms limits and boundaries. According to Adam, the present and success of an organism or a group of organisms depend upon a complex of conditions. Any condition which approaches or exceeds the limits or tolerance is said to be a limit condition or a limiting factor. Boundaries are human-determined values of the control variable set as a safe distance from dangerous levels, dangerous limits, or from its global threshold. Determining a safe distance involves normative judgments of how societies choose to deal with risk and uncertainty. The choice of the control variable for each planetary boundary is based in the assessment of the variable that on balance may provide the most comprehensive, aggregated, and measurable parameter for individual boundaries. Much of the uncertainty in quantifying planetary boundaries is due to our lack of scientific knowledge about the nature of the biophysical thresholds themselves, the intrinsic uncertainty of how complex systems behave, and the ways in which other biophysical processes, such as feedback mechanisms, interact with the primary control variable. Rockstrom and colleagues provided us with breakthrough knowledge on the Earth boundaries, and I recommend intensely that you read their 290 article And there is another one from, I think, this year or last year. It is in your bibliography.